For weeks, a quiet girl in an oversized hoodie slipped into a small-town diner and sat silently in the corner booth. She never ordered, just asked for water. But one waitress noticed. Every morning, Sharon secretly brought her breakfast, asking no questions, only offering kindness. Then one morning, 2 army trucks pulled up outside, and the truth that unfolded left the entire diner in stunned silence. If you believe compassion can change a life, type respect in the comments. Sharon Ellis was 37 years old and had been pouring coffee at May's Diner longer than most people in town could remember. The diner sat at the edge of Route 16, just before the fields opened up and the road lost cell service. It was the kind of place where the windows fogged in winter, where the floor creaked in a familiar way, and where the booths bore the indentations of generations who'd come before. Soldiers, farmers, truckers, and teenagers trying to look older than they were. Each morning at 5 o'clock a.m., long before the sun clawed its way over the pine trees, Sharon would unlock the front door, the bell above it giving a tired jingle. She'd start the coffee, straighten the salt shakers, and flip the chairs off the tables with practiced motions. Her uniform, a soft blue button-down and dark jeans, was always clean but faded from hundreds of washings. She tied her apron around her waist, a pale green one stitched with tiny daisies, a gift from a woman long gone, and tucked a pencil behind her ear, the lead-worn dull from habit. She greeted the early risers with a smile that felt almost like muscle memory. Truckers with sleep in their eyes, retired officers with folded newspapers under their arms, young privates trying not to look lost. She called them Hun and Sugar and remembered their orders by heart. Extra crispy bacon for Bill, black coffee with 2 sugars for Annie, no onions for Carl, who claimed they gave him visions. Sharon didn't talk much about herself. She lived in a 1-bedroom above the old hardware store, where the paint peeled, but the view of the evening stars was worth the chipped stairs. Her neighbors called her quiet but kind, which was fine by her. She kept to herself, her past wrapped in silence, like letters tied with string in the bottom of a dresser drawer. There were photos, yes, but they stayed tucked inside a book she no longer opened. A woman in uniform. A child with gap-toothed laughter. A friend with eyes too bright for how her story ended. The people who came through May's Diner didn't ask questions. Maybe they knew better. Maybe they recognized something in Sharon, the same way she sometimes recognized it in them. That quiet grief, that long patience, that way of going on, not because it got easier, but because stopping wasn't an option. She liked the diner best in those quiet moments before the first customer, when the only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the coffee pot's steady drip, when the air still held the cold of the night, when she could pretend, for just a few minutes, that life had always been this simple. It was a Tuesday, the kind of morning that arrived wrapped in fog, thick enough to blur the headlights of passing cars. The street outside May's Diner looked like a painting still waiting for its details. Sharon had just finished wiping down the counter when the bell above the door gave its familiar chime, soft, reluctant, like it too was still waking up. The girl appeared like a ghost in the mist, small, maybe 11 or 12. She wore an oversized gray hoodie that swallowed her shoulders and hung low past her hips, the sleeves falling almost to her fingertips. Her jeans were worn thin at the knees, shoes scuffed and mismatched, one lace dragging across the tile as she moved. No backpack, no school books, no adult trailing behind. She walked in slowly, as if testing the ground with each step, like the diner might vanish if she moved too fast. Sharon looked up, expecting to hear the scrape of a parent's boots behind her. Maybe someone with that rushed, apologetic smile people wore when kids wandered off. But the door shut quietly behind the girl. She was alone. She chose the corner booth, furthest from the door, closest to the window, and sat with her back to the wall, her eyes scanning the room in a way that wasn't casual. They were wide eyes, cautious ones, the kind that didn't miss much but didn't reveal much either. Sharon saw something in that glance she couldn't quite name. Not fear exactly, but something next to it. When Sharon walked over, pen tucked behind her ear, order pad in hand, the girl didn't look up. "Can I get you something, sweetheart?" Sharon asked, keeping her voice warm but soft. The girl shifted slightly, pulling her sleeves over her hands. "Just water," she said, barely louder than a breath. Sharon nodded. "Sure thing." She didn't ask questions, didn't push, just brought a glass of water and set it gently on the table, adding a straw with a paper wrapper twisted like a candy cane. The girl gave the tiniest of nods. Sharon didn't linger, but as she walked back behind the counter, she kept her in the corner of her vision, the way you watch a stray animal. Curious. Careful not to spook it. For the next hour, the girl stayed where she was. Didn't touch the water, didn't look at the menu, just stared out the window, her face unreadable, her small hands folded in her lap. When the school bus rumbled by at 7:20, she didn't move. By 8 o'clock, she was gone, just as quiet as she'd come. No mess left behind, no name offered, just a faint imprint on the booth cushion, and a silence Sharon couldn't quite shake. The next morning, the girl was back. Same booth, same hoodie, same silence. She slipped through the door at exactly 6:45, as if she'd marked the minute by heart. Sharon was refilling the sugar canisters when she heard the bell and looked up to find those same watchful eyes already scanning the room. The girl made no noise as she slid into the corner booth, hands tucked into the sleeves of her hoodie, eyes fixed just beyond the window where the mist still clung to the glass. Sharon said nothing. She simply nodded in quiet acknowledgement and fetched a glass of water. Day 3 came and went the same way. Then day 4. By the end of the first week, it was routine. The girl never arrived late, never ordered more than water. She never smiled, but she wasn't rude either. She would nod slightly in thanks and keep her voice to one word when she used it at all. "Thank you." Barely audible, almost shy. Sharon watched from behind the counter, curiosity tucked behind the motions of her work. The girl wasn't just quiet, she was careful. She didn't fidget, didn't daydream. She sat straight, her eyes moving slowly across the room like someone who had learned early that safety was a thing you earned by never letting your guard down. On the 5th morning, Sharon made a quiet decision. A plate of pancakes, 3, golden brown, not quite uniform in shape, appeared on the pass window. Sharon reached for them before May could call the order number. She walked over to the booth with easy steps, placing the plate down with a casual shrug. "Kitchen made an extra," she said, her voice light. "Would be a shame to throw it out." The girl didn't move at first. Her eyes darted from the plate to Sharon's face, reading for intention. Suspicion and hunger danced quietly behind her expression. Sharon didn't wait for permission. She just gave a small smile and turned back toward the counter. 10 minutes later, when she glanced over again, the plate was empty. The girl had returned to her quiet position, hands in her lap, gaze lowered to the tabletop. The next day, Sharon brought scrambled eggs and toast. The day after that, oatmeal with cinnamon. Each time she made up a new excuse. Wrong order, cook's mistake. May made too much again. The girl never challenged the lie. She never asked for more, never asked why. But she always ate, every bite, carefully, gratefully. And just before leaving, always the same 2 words. "Thank you." That was enough. For now. By the second week, Sharon found herself watching the clock. At 6:45 a.m. sharp, the door would open, the bell giving its weary chime, and there she was, the girl in the gray hoodie, sleeves still too long, steps still soft as if she didn't want to leave footprints. She never looked surprised to see her breakfast already waiting for her. Pancakes one day, oatmeal the next, sometimes toast with just a little butter and jam on the side. Sharon pretended it was coincidence. The girl pretended to believe her. Nobody in the diner knew her name. And that was beginning to feel strange in a town where everyone knew everyone, where grocery clerks remembered your dog's birthday and the pharmacist asked how your mother was doing before you even gave your prescription. In places like this, strangers stood out. Children without guardians stood out more. But no one asked. Not the customers who saw her daily, not the older men reading newspapers at the counter, not the mothers who came in with toddlers and diaper bags. People glanced at the girl, then looked away. Maybe they figured she was someone's niece. Maybe they thought she was a local they just hadn't noticed before. Or maybe they didn't want to know. Sharon felt the questions bubbling up sometimes, especially in the quieter moments, when she was wiping down the syrup dispensers or folding napkins into imperfect triangles. Where did the girl go when she left? Why did no one ever come in looking for her? Was she walking home, or was this her only stop? But each time, just as the question rose to her lips, Sharon would look across the diner and see the girl, head down, fingers tracing slow invisible shapes on the tabletop, and the question would dissolve. Some wounds, Sharon knew, retreated when chased. Push too hard and they vanish behind tighter walls. She'd seen it before, in soldiers who came home different, in friends who carried invisible injuries deeper than any scar. The kind of pain that made you fold into yourself until you forgot how to uncurl. So she didn't ask. Not her name, not her story. Instead, she made sure the pancakes were always warm, that the hot cocoa had just the right amount of whipped cream, and that no one ever sat too close to the corner booth. It became an unspoken rule. That space, that girl, it belonged to something delicate. A truce, maybe. A small act of grace in a world that didn't always offer many. And every morning, just before she left, the girl would look up, only for a moment, and whisper, "Thank you." Nothing more. But everything. May noticed on the 12th morning. She was pouring batter into the griddle molds behind the pass window, her arms moving with the precision of someone who'd been cooking breakfast for 20 years without missing a beat. From her vantage point in the kitchen, she had a clear line of sight to the corner booth, the one that had lately never been empty at sunrise. She didn't say anything at first. Just squinted out over her glasses, watched as Sharon set down a plate of pancakes with her usual quiet care, and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. By the time Sharon returned to the counter, May had already stepped into the narrow back hallway and waited, arms crossed, one foot tapping slow against the linoleum. "She yours?" May asked, not accusing, but not soft either. Sharon didn't pretend to misunderstand. "No." May raised an eyebrow. "Then why's she eating like she is?" Sharon kept her voice even. "She's hungry." May sighed, the kind of sigh that came with 1,000 untold stories. "You get attached, you get burned, Sharon. I've seen it before, these strays." She trailed off, her eyes narrowing slightly. "They vanish. One day they're sitting there needing you. Next day they're gone, and you're left holding the memory like it's a debt you never signed up for." Sharon looked past May toward the pass window, where the girl sat in her usual place, the sleeves of her hoodie rolled just enough to hold a fork steady. "She doesn't ask for anything." "That's the worst kind," May muttered. "The quiet ones. They sneak under your ribs and settle in. Sharon didn't argue. She just pulled her apron a little tighter, wiped her hands on a towel, and went back to work. May didn't stop her. They didn't speak of it again, not directly. But Sharon noticed how May started making accidental extra batches of scrambled eggs right around 6:40. How a clean mug was always sitting near the cocoa tin before the girl walked in. How despite all her warnings, May never once told Sharon to stop. Even so, the words stuck with her. Not in a way that made her doubt herself, but in the way warnings often do when they come from someone who's been left before. Sharon carried May's caution like a folded note in her pocket, but it didn't change her steps. She still poured the syrup carefully, still brought the food warm, still never asked the girl her name, because some people needed time to feel safe. And Sharon had enough time to give. Winter arrived on quiet feet, slipping frost across the Mississippi fields and turning the diner's windows into wavering mirrors. The world outside May's satchel-colored walls grew hard and brittle. Inside, Sharon fought the cold with small, deliberate mercies. She switched from pancakes to oatmeal, stirring in brown sugar until it melted like amber, adding a pat of butter that shimmered on the surface before disappearing. She dusted the tops with cinnamon, just enough to perfume the air, then followed each bowl with a mug of cocoa crowned by a cloud of whipped cream that sagged and swirled as the steam rose. At 6:45 a.m. the girl appeared, the fog of her breath mixing with the fog of the dawn. The frayed strings of her hoodie now poked from beneath a second-hand parka a size too large. Someone, somewhere, had tried to keep her warm. She eased into the corner booth as if it might protest her weight, and when Sharon set the oatmeal before her, those guarded eyes lit for a heartbeat, enough for Sharon to see the child behind the sentry. Most mornings the ritual repeated without a crack in its shell of silence. Sharon would glide by, depositing breakfast and moving on before gratitude turned to embarrassment. The girl would cradle the cocoa between both palms, letting the heat seep into the tender skin of her fingers, then bend over the bowl, spooning oatmeal with swift, neat motions, as though afraid someone might reach over and take it back. When the whipped cream left a frothy mustache on her upper lip, she wiped it away with the back of her sleeve, cheeks flushing a color warmer than the drink. Occasionally, the tiniest change flickered across the booth. The curl of a smile when Sharon slid an extra marshmallow across the table. A breathy laugh quickly swallowed when whipped cream collapsed in a sugary avalanche. Each spark vanished almost as soon as it came, but Sharon noticed. She collected those moments the way other people pressed flowers, delicate proof that something once bloomed here. Still, no name, no questions. Sharon could have asked 1,000 times, "Where do you go after this? Who waits for you? What song does your voice make when you aren't whispering?" But each day she chose the comfort of steady kindness over the hazard of curiosity. The girl's gaze told her enough. Questions were cliffs. Answers might break the fragile truce of warmth, cocoa, and quiet. Outside, January winds rattled the diner's sign until one chain snapped, and May had to rig a rope to keep it from swinging loose altogether. But inside, Sharon kept stirring, kept pouring, kept pretending the extra oatmeal was a kitchen mistake. And every dawn, when the bell chimed and the girl stepped through the door, a hush of relief passed through Sharon's chest, an exhale she never admitted she'd been holding. No one spoke of the cold. No one spoke of fear. The girl ate, Sharon served, and somewhere between the spoonfuls and the steam, winter felt a fraction less cruel. The murmurs started like a draft slipping under a closed door, barely there at first, but cold enough to notice. A lifted eyebrow, a glance that lingered too long on the corner booth. Whispers just loud enough to be heard, but not quite direct enough to answer. "Same kid again?" a man in a feed store jacket muttered to his friend as he stirred his coffee. "Looks like it," the friend replied. "Must be nice, getting a free meal every morning." The words hung in the air like grease smoke. Sharon heard them, of course. She always did. The diner was small enough that secrets didn't stand a chance. Another customer, a woman in scrubs who came in after her night shift, leaned over her menu one morning and asked without looking up, "That girl got no home? Or is this just charity on the house now?" Sharon didn't answer. She refilled the woman's coffee, nodded once, and moved on. Her silence wasn't permission, but it wasn't a fight either. She had long ago learned that defending kindness to people who didn't understand it was like trying to explain music to someone who refused to listen. The girl never noticed, or pretended not to. She kept her eyes low, her hands tucked in her sleeves, her attention fixed on the plate in front of her. But Sharon could feel it. The way tension crept into the booth like smoke through cracks. The way kindness, once quiet and simple, now wore a target. May noticed, too. She didn't say anything this time, just kept flipping pancakes with extra force, as if she were flattening the words she couldn't say into the batter. Sharon had been judged before. Years ago, when she returned to this town after her discharge, after the fire, after the story people never heard the whole of. The stares, the hushed tones, the sense that she was someone to be pitied or avoided or misunderstood. It had hardened her, yes, but not completely. Something inside her had stayed soft. Maybe it was the memory of Grace. Maybe it was the way the girl's eyes sometimes met hers for just a second longer than the day before. Whatever it was, Sharon kept bringing the plates, kept warming the cocoa, kept pretending the food was leftover. A lucky mistake. A harmless coincidence. She carried the judgment like a stone in her apron pocket. Heavy, but not enough to slow her down. Not yet. Because some things, some people, were worth the wait. May waited until after the rush, when the breakfast plates were cleared, and the diner had settled into its usual lull between the morning regulars and the early lunch crowd. The hiss of the coffee maker was the only sound in the kitchen when she finally said it, not looking up from the stack of order slips she was sorting. "We're not a soup kitchen, hun." Sharon didn't flinch. She knew it was coming. The comments had been getting louder, more pointed. Someone had left a note on the receipt tray that morning. If she's hungry, call the state. That's what taxes are for. May set the slips down, wiped her hands on her apron, and turned to face her. Her voice wasn't sharp exactly, but it was edged with something firm. "You've got a good heart, but hearts don't pay bills. And this place," she gestured around the kitchen, toward the flickering light above the pantry and the oven that needed a second try to ignite, "ain't running on good intentions." Sharon met her gaze steadily. "I'll pay for it." May blinked, surprised by the quickness of the reply. "I'll cover her meals," Sharon continued. "Out of my tips. It won't affect the register. One breakfast a day, that's all." May crossed her arms, watching her closely now. "You don't make enough to play saint, Sharon. You're already skipping the dentist. You think I don't see you icing your wrist at the end of the day?" "I'm not playing anything," Sharon said quietly. "She's just a kid." The silence between them stretched long enough to hear the creak of the front door as a customer stepped in, then out again. May finally exhaled through her nose, shaking her head as if trying to rattle loose a stubborn thought. "Your dime, your decision," she muttered. "But if I catch you sneaking extras or letting it slow you down, it ends." "It won't," Sharon said. May gave her a long look. "You think feeding her is going to save her?" "No," Sharon said. "But it keeps her from going hungry today. That's enough." May didn't answer. She turned back to the stove, cracking eggs into a skillet with more force than usual. But the next morning, there was an extra biscuit in the warming tray. No explanation. no questions. Just a quiet concession between two women who had seen too much and still decided, in their own ways, not to look away. The diner felt off the moment Sharon unlocked the door. The air was colder than usual, clinging to her skin as she moved through the motions, flipping on the lights, starting the coffee, wiping down the counter. Everything in its place, everything familiar. But something was missing, like a note left out of a song. By 6:30, the corner booth was empty. That wasn't unusual, not yet. Sharon checked the clock more often than she needed to. She arranged the cutlery a little neater than usual, folded the napkins tighter. At 6:45, the door didn't open. No bell, no scuffed shoes, no oversized hoodie slipping in with the fog. She told herself not to care. Kids get sick. Schedules change. Maybe someone had finally noticed she was gone and taken her back to wherever she was supposed to be. Maybe she was warm, wherever she was. Maybe this was good. Still, Sharon made the oatmeal. Brown sugar, a drizzle of honey. Whipped cream on the cocoa, even though May had said last week that they were running low. She placed it all at the corner booth just like she always did, with the same casual lie. An extra bowl, a kitchen mistake, food that shouldn't go to waste, but the food sat untouched. The whipped cream melted into a cloudy ring. The oatmeal cooled and thickened. The cocoa lost its steam. Sharon cleared tables, poured coffee, smiled when she had to. But she kept glancing at that booth. Watching the plate grow cold felt like watching a clock that had stopped ticking. By 7:30, the regulars had started to notice too. Carl glanced toward the booth and raised an eyebrow but said nothing. May came out from the kitchen once, looked at the plate, then back at Sharon. Her lips pressed into a line, her eyes unreadable. Still, she said nothing. At 8 o'clock, the food was still there. The girl was not. Sharon cleared the table slowly, wiping away the untouched crumbs with a kind of reverence. She wrapped the cold oatmeal in foil and tucked it into a container. Not because she thought it would be eaten, but because she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. The silence in the booth lingered, heavier than usual. It wasn't just absence. It was echo. A space that had once been occupied by need, now empty, still warm from memory. Sharon didn't say anything. She just placed the clean plate back on the counter, turned toward the kitchen, and started another pot of coffee. But the quiet followed her, pressing against her ribs like a question left unanswered. 9 days passed, no sign of her. The booth stayed empty, but Sharon kept setting a plate down each morning at 6:45. First oatmeal, then pancakes, then toast and eggs. She rotated the meals like she always had, as if the girl were still sitting there, silent and waiting. She poured the cocoa too, adding the whipped cream without thinking. Ritual, not reason. She told herself she wasn't looking at the door. Not really. Just happening to be facing that direction when the bell chimed. But her ears were trained now. She could pick out the sound of worn sneakers over the chatter of forks and plates. She didn't hear them. Customers noticed. Of course they did. People always notice what doesn't quite fit. On the third day, a man in a rumpled suit leaned across his booth and asked, loud enough for others to hear, "That plate for your imaginary friend?" He laughed to himself like it was clever. Sharon didn't answer. She just wiped the counter and walked away. On the 5th day, a couple whispered as she passed. "Still feeding the ghost girl," one murmured. "Maybe she finally found a real place to eat." The words stung, but not because they were cruel, because they assumed there had been a choice in it. May said nothing, but she watched, not with judgment, but with the quiet weariness of someone who's learned how to measure pain in other people. She didn't stop Sharon, didn't comment when the pancakes went cold and were tossed in the bin. But the griddle hissed each morning at 6:30 sharp. and an extra plate still found its way to the pass window. The 7th day brought snow, rare enough in Mississippi to warrant a front-page photo. School buses were delayed. Salt trucks rumbled past the diner like slow-moving tanks. Sharon brushed snow off the windowsills and still made the oatmeal, still poured the cocoa, still waited for a door that didn't open. On the 9th day, the whipped cream melted before anyone touched it. Sharon cleared the plate just like all the others, wrapping the uneaten food with hands that moved slower than usual. May didn't speak, but her eyes followed the container as Sharon tucked it into the fridge. The corner booth held a different kind of silence now. Not just absence, but the shadow of presence, something that had once existed and might not return. Sharon didn't stop the food. She couldn't. It wasn't hope exactly, it was memory made visible. A plate set down like a candle in a window. Just in case. It was a Tuesday when Sharon found out. She was in the back, folding towels and listening to the low crackle of the kitchen radio, when May stepped in, holding her phone like it was something sharp. She didn't say anything, just handed it over with a look that said, "You should see this for yourself." It was a photo. Grainy, but clear enough. Sharon, caught mid-motion, placing a plate of pancakes at the empty corner booth. The caption read, "Rosie the Ghost Whisperer, feeding spirits since 6 a.m." A laughing emoji trailed the words, as if that softened the cruelty. The post had spread fast, shared through the local Facebook group with all the subtlety of a wildfire. Underneath, the comments bloomed like weeds. Maybe it's performance art. If she wants to feed invisible kids, she should do it on her own time. Bet this place is skimming off charity dollars now. These do-gooders always want a pat on the back. Sharon stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then she handed the phone back, walked into the pantry and opened the app on her own phone with slow fingers. The post was there, of course. Her name wasn't mentioned, but in a town like this, that hardly mattered. Everyone knew. She scrolled through the comments once. Only once. Then she deleted the app. When she stepped back into the kitchen, May was watching her with that same unreadable expression, the one that knew too much and offered too little. "Want me to say something?" she asked, almost gently. Sharon shook her head. "Let it go." The rest of the morning moved in slow motion. The regulars didn't say anything to her face, but she could feel the difference. A hesitation when they handed her their menus, a glance that held just a beat too long, an unspoken question between the salt shaker and the coffee refill, and still, at 6:45, she made the pancakes. Still, she walked them to the corner booth. Still, she set the plate down with the same quiet care. Let them laugh, she thought. Let them roll their eyes. They hadn't seen the way the girl held that first forkful like it might disappear. They hadn't heard the whisper of thank you, spoken like a lifeline. Sharon didn't need them to understand. She just needed the booth to be ready, in case. That night, after the diner closed and the last dishes were stacked to dry, Sharon climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment above the old pharmacy. The town had quieted, the kind of stillness that only came in winter, when the air seemed to hold its breath and the night wrapped tight around every roof and fence post. She made tea, though she didn't drink it, and sat at her kitchen table staring at the small wooden box on the shelf across the room. It was tucked behind an old recipe book, as if hiding from her. She hadn't touched it in years, but the day had left a weight in her chest that no silence could shake, and some ghosts didn't like to be ignored. The box wasn't fancy, just smooth, worn wood with a brass hinge that creaked when she opened it. Inside were things she had once promised herself she'd never forget, and then tried her best not to remember. A dog tag rested on top. Scratched, the chain curled like a sleeping thing. She ran her thumb over the name etched into the metal. Thompson, Grace M. Blood type. Serial number, nothing else. Beneath it, a photograph, edges curled from time and touch. Two young women in desert camo, arms slung around each other, grinning into sun so bright they had to squint. Sharon looked barely 20, wild-haired, sunburned, and free in a way she hadn't been since. And then there was the letter, folded so many times the creases had nearly split. The envelope was unsealed, the handwriting loopy and rushed, as if written in the dark or in a hurry to say everything before it was too late. Sharon, if you're reading this, it means something went wrong. She read it slowly, even though she'd memorized it long ago. Grace had written about Lena, her daughter, 5 years old then, with a laugh like a hiccup and a love for drawing horses on the walls. She wrote about her fear that if anything happened, no one would understand how much Lena needed someone steady, someone who knew how to sit with silence and not try to fix it. Don't let them break her, Grace had written. Don't let the world turn her into another closed door. If she ever finds you, if she shows up, I'm asking, feed her, love her. You'll know her when you see her. Sharon closed her eyes. She had known. Somewhere deep down, before the rumors, before the empty booth, before the first thank you whispered like a secret, she had known. And now, sitting in the dim light of her kitchen, the dog tag cold in her palm, she felt that old ache again. Not just grief, but purpose, the kind that rooted itself inside and didn't let go. She folded the letter, placed it back in the box, and whispered into the quiet, I haven't forgotten. Not Grace, not Lena, not any of it. Sharon couldn't sleep that night. The city outside her window was still, save for the occasional hum of a car passing through town or the rustle of tree branches brushing the building. She lay awake in the dark, the memory box still open on the table, the folded letter sitting beside her tea, now cold and forgotten. She read it again, just the last few lines. Grace's handwriting wavered at the end, as if the pen had trembled in her hand. If anything ever happens to me, find my little girl. Just make sure she's okay. You'll know her. Trust me, Sharon, you'll know. Sharon had kept those words buried for so long, like they were part of a life she'd left behind in the sand and smoke. Grace had always carried her worry quietly, like a soldier carried their gear, heavy but necessary. She hadn't spoken often about Lena, not out loud, but when she did, it was with a love that softened her voice in a way Sharon never heard anywhere else. She's got my eyes, Grace had said once, tracing the edge of a photo tucked into her notebook. Poor kid, gonna see too much. Sharon sat up slowly, her breath catching in her chest. The eyes. She saw them clearly now. The girl's cautious, measuring stare, always half hidden beneath the hood. Eyes that scanned the room the way Grace once scanned rooftops during patrol. Not afraid exactly, just aware. Always aware. She had known those eyes. She had stared into them over early morning rations and late-night watch shifts. She had seen them bright with laughter, wide with grief, heavy with exhaustion. And now she had seen them again, in a girl who said nothing, who asked for nothing, who ate her food with quiet gratitude and left behind a silence that felt like something sacred. The truth clicked into place with a kind of quiet violence. Not a shout, but a deep, steady recognition. A promise once made in the heat of war, now returned with winter's breath. A child left behind by the one person Sharon had never managed to let go of. She pressed the letter against her chest, closed her eyes, and whispered Grace's name into the dark. It wasn't charity, it wasn't pity. It was a promise, one she was finally ready to keep. The morning began like all the others, slow and gray, the air thick with frost and the hush that came just before sunrise. Sharon moved through her routine with practiced hands, brew the coffee, warm the biscuits, wipe down the counter with a rag that smelled faintly of lemon. At 6:45, she placed a plate of pancakes at the corner booth. She didn't look at the door. Hope had become a quiet ache, something she carried in her chest like a bruise. By the 14th day, she'd trained herself not to expect anything. But she still left the plate, still added a curl of whipped cream to the cocoa that sat untouched beside it. Some things, she'd decided, you do simply because they're right. The diner had begun to fill with its usual faces. Carl with his crossword, Annie counting tips in her planner, a young couple whispering over toast. Forks scraped gently against plates, coffee cups clinked. The radio murmured low in the background. Then came the sound. It started as a distant hum, low, steady, unfamiliar. Sharon paused mid-pour, her hand hovering over Carl's mug. Outside, the streetlights flickered against the still dim sky. The hum grew louder, a mechanical growl that rolled down Main Street like thunder dragged across asphalt. Every head turned toward the windows. 2 military trucks rumbled into view, their engines loud and slow and purposeful. Olive green, spotless, the kind you didn't see unless something important was happening. They pulled up in front of the diner, parking with perfect alignment, like they were rehearsing for a parade. The silence inside May's fell heavy. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the radio seemed to fade. May stepped out from the kitchen, her apron streaked with flour. She stood beside Sharon at the counter, both women staring through the glass. "What the hell?" May whispered, mostly to herself. The truck doors opened. Uniformed soldiers stepped down, tall and composed, moving like shadows with discipline sewn into their very posture. 2 of them flanked the last man to step out, a high-ranking officer by the look of his crisp uniform and the polished weight of medals on his chest. He removed his cap slowly, eyes scanning the front of the diner, the sign above the window, the faded flag hanging just to the right of the door. Then he stepped forward. Inside the diner, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Sharon set the coffee pot down with trembling hands. Something was coming, and it carried the weight of a promise long kept and a silence finally breaking. The bell above the diner door gave a single, clean chime as it swung open. Cold air swept in first, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots against tile, measured, polished, deliberate. She stood in the doorway for a moment, framed by the fading dawn behind her. A female officer, tall and composed, her dress uniform so immaculate it looked pressed by ceremony itself. Bars and ribbons adorned her chest in neat rows, her cap tucked under one arm. Her posture held decades of discipline, and yet it was the stillness in her face that caught Sharon's breath, the kind of expression that gave nothing away, carved from silence, trained not to break. Every head in the diner turned. Coffee cups paused in midair. Even May, who never missed a beat during breakfast rush, stood still behind the pass window, spatula frozen in her hand. The officer's gaze moved once across the room, then fixed on Sharon. She crossed the floor without hesitation. No clipboard, no folder, just purpose in her step and something unreadable in her eyes. Sharon didn't move. She felt suddenly very small behind the counter, her hands damp from wiping down coffee mugs, her apron smudged with flour from the morning's biscuits. The officer stopped directly in front of her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the woman offered a quiet nod, respectful, not formal. "I believe you've been taking care of someone very important to us," she said, her voice clear and low, every syllable shaped with intent. Sharon's mouth opened, but the words tangled behind her ribs. The officer reached into her coat and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. She didn't extend it yet, just held it in both hands, as if offering it too soon might break something fragile between them. "Her name is Lena Grace Thompson," she continued, softer now. "She's the daughter of Sergeant Grace Thompson. Deployed overseas nearly 2 years ago. KIA 8 months ago in Helmand Province." The name hung there, heavy and electric. Grace. Sharon's knees weakened slightly, but she stood her ground. Her voice, when it finally came, was a whisper. "She's been coming here, every morning. I didn't know." "You didn't need to," the officer interrupted gently. "You gave her what no system, no foster report, no military record could. You gave her somewhere safe. You kept a promise that wasn't even yours." Sharon stared at the woman, her heart thudding like distant drums. Behind her, the diner had gone silent. Every customer still as stone, every breath held. "I have something for you," the officer said, this time offering the envelope. "And a message." The envelope in the officer's hands trembled slightly now, not from fear, but from the weight of what it carried. She looked at Sharon for a long moment, then finally placed it on the counter between them. Not forceful, not ceremonial, just quiet, deliberate truth settling into the space. "Her name," she said gently, "is Lena Grace Thompson." Sharon's breath hitched at the sound. Grace. The name alone opened something deep inside her, like a door that had been shut too long. She blinked once, slowly, as if the air had thickened around her. The officer continued. Her voice was steadier now, shaped by practice but softened with humanity. Her mother was Sergeant Grace Thompson, 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. Your unit, I believe. Sharon gave a small nod, unable to find anything else. She was killed in action 8 months ago during a nighttime operation in Helmand Province. We recovered her personal effects, dog tags, a letter addressed to you. Sharon reached out and touched the envelope with her fingertips, as if it might vanish if she held it too tightly. She never named a father. No relatives close enough to take custody. Lena was placed in temporary care, but she didn't stay. The words landed with a weight that settled deep in Sharon's chest. "She ran," she whispered. 3 months ago, the officer confirmed. No sign, no note. She just disappeared. And yet she had been here, sitting in that corner booth each morning, hunched inside an oversized hoodie, asking for nothing but water, accepting pancakes as if they were contraband, surviving with the same quiet resilience her mother had once worn like armor. Sharon could see it now with painful clarity, the way Lena had positioned herself to face the door, the silence, the hesitance to trust. All the pieces of a life lived in the shadows, stitched together by fear and memory. Grace had taught her daughter how to disappear if she ever had to, how to be still, how to watch, how to wait. The officer's voice softened. "We wouldn't have found her if not for you. One of our contacts saw the post online, the photo, the plate left at the empty booth. Someone recognized the girl." A pause, then, "You didn't know her name, but she never stopped writing about you. In her journal, in the letters she kept hidden in her shoes, you were the one constant." Sharon felt her throat tighten. She remembered, the officer said, even when the world forgot. The officer slid the envelope across the counter with a care that felt ceremonial, though no orders were given and no ranks exchanged. Sharon stared at it as though it might burn. It was plain, white, creased, soft at the corners. The handwriting on the front stopped her cold. To whoever finds her. The words were small, written in Grace's unmistakable script. Slanted, a little rushed, but certain. The kind of handwriting that came from someone used to jotting coordinates and field notes under pressure. But this was personal. This was final. Sharon didn't open it right away. She let her fingers rest over the ink, her heart thudding so loudly she was sure the whole diner could hear it. The world around her, the hushed booths, the muted shuffle of chairs, even the sound of May breathing behind the pass window, faded until only the letter remained. The officer said nothing more. She stepped back with a respectful nod, giving Sharon space that only those who've known loss truly understand. With trembling hands, Sharon unfolded the envelope and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. The paper had yellowed slightly, creased where it had been folded, unfolded, refolded, handled by people who knew its weight. Her eyes scanned the words slowly. If you're reading this, then I didn't make it back. I knew the risk when I signed up again. I didn't tell Lena everything. She's too young. But I told her one thing over and over: if anything ever happens to me, go find Sharon Ellis. Sharon's throat tightened. She could feel Grace's voice in the ink, almost hear it in the way she spoke plainly, without apology. You know me better than anyone. You know I didn't run from hard things. But this, Sharon, this was the one thing I was afraid of, leaving her alone. If someone found her, if she made her way to you somehow. Please, don't let the world break her. She's tough, yeah, she's me, but she's still a child. Still soft in ways she doesn't show. Sharon's eyes blurred, but she kept reading. Love her like I would. No big speeches, just be there. Feed her, sit with her, let her have one place where she doesn't have to explain herself. I know that's asking a lot, but I also know you. The final lines were scratched deeper into the page. You've got more heart than you let on, and if anyone can carry this part of me forward, it's you. No signature, just that truth. Sharon folded the letter with shaking fingers, pressed it to her chest, and closed her eyes. Grace was gone, but her words remained, and so did the girl. Outside, the trucks still rumbled, their engines idling like slow thunder in the quiet street. Frost clung to their fenders, steam curling from beneath the hoods. The officer stepped back from the counter with a nod to someone just beyond the diner door, a silent signal that passed between uniforms like breath. The door opened again. A soldier stepped aside, and then, from behind the broad frame of the front tire, a small figure appeared. Lena. Same hoodie, though now layered under a borrowed coat 2 sizes too big. Her hair was pulled back in a hasty braid, wisps escaping around her ears. She looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of being found had pressed her further inward. But her eyes, those gray-green eyes that had once flicked across every corner of the diner with suspicion, locked on Sharon the moment she stepped inside. She didn't hesitate. She didn't speak. She just walked, fast and quiet, the way she had come through that door every morning. But this time there was no booth, no pancakes, no cocoa waiting. Just Sharon, behind the counter, apron dusted with flour, hands frozen in place. Breath caught somewhere between disbelief and something that felt dangerously like relief. Lena reached her in 3 long strides, and then she broke. No words, no explanation, just a sudden, silent rush forward, arms wrapping around Sharon's middle, face pressed into her apron, shoulders shaking in a way that didn't come from cold. Sharon knelt instinctively, wrapping both arms around the girl, one hand cradling the back of her head. She didn't speak, didn't ask where Lena had been or why she'd disappeared. There would be time for that later. This moment wasn't for answers. It was for letting go. The sound Lena made wasn't loud, but it cracked open something in the room. A muffled sob, buried against Sharon's chest, followed by another and another, each one harder to hold back than the last. Her fingers clutched the fabric of Sharon's apron, like a child hanging onto the edge of a dream she wasn't ready to wake from. For the first time since she'd arrived, Lena cried. Not quiet tears, not polite sadness, but full trembling grief, the kind that lives deep in the bones and waits for a safe place to fall apart. Sharon held her and let it come. She didn't shush her, she didn't let go. When Lena's sobs softened into hiccups, when the weight of her grief eased just enough for her to breathe again, Sharon gently smoothed the hair from her forehead and whispered something only the girl could hear. A promise, maybe. A memory folded into words. Whatever it was, it settled Lena's trembling, and she leaned into Sharon's chest like she had found the only steady place left in the world. The diner, once quiet in confusion, now sat in reverent stillness. No one spoke. No one dared. Even the clink of a coffee cup being set down felt too loud for what was unfolding. The officer stepped forward again, her boots clicking softly on the tile. She stood just a few feet away, her face steady but no longer unreadable. Something in her eyes shimmered. Grief. Respect? Maybe both. She came to attention, spine straight, heels together. Then, without ceremony but with undeniable weight, she raised her right hand and saluted. Not toward the flag by the door, not toward her own, toward Sharon. You didn't just feed her, she said quietly, her voice carrying in the stillness. You protected her dignity. You gave her a place to be human. You gave her a chance to be seen. The words landed gently, but with force. Sharon didn't speak. Her throat was too tight, her arms still wrapped around the girl who had become a living echo of her oldest promise. Through the front window, movement caught in the corner of her eye. The soldiers. Every one of them, standing outside by the trucks, followed the officer's lead. In one fluid motion, their hands rose in salute. A line of solemn, uniformed men and women paying respect, not for a fallen comrade this time, but for a woman in an apron in a corner diner who had done something that didn't earn medals or citations. She had simply shown up. Every morning, quiet, steady, unseen, until now. Inside, a few customers rose slowly to their feet, unsure if they should follow, but knowing they couldn't remain seated. Even May, from behind the counter, stood with arms crossed and eyes glassy, a nod barely visible beneath the brim of her hairnet. Sharon blinked hard against the heat rising behind her eyes. No one spoke again. They didn't need to. The salute said everything. The next morning, the diner hummed with its usual rhythm. Eggs sizzling, coffee brewing, the doorbell chiming with the same weary jingle. But something had shifted. Subtle as sunlight through a window cracked just enough to warm the floor. The corner booth, the one with its faded red vinyl seat and a hairline crack in the table, no longer looked forgotten. It looked sacred. May came in early, earlier than usual. She didn't say why, just brushed past Sharon with a small cardboard box under her arm and a screwdriver sticking out of her apron pocket. She didn't ask for help. May never did. Sharon watched from the counter, hands still damp from drying mugs. The diner was quiet, the first light of morning painting everything gold and soft. May knelt at the corner booth, unscrewed the old napkin holder with firm, steady hands, and set it aside like something that had done its job long enough. From the box, she pulled a small brass plaque, no bigger than her palm. The surface gleamed in the light. Simple, unadorned, no scrolls or flourishes. Just 4 words, etched clean, reserved for Grace's girl. May fixed it to the table with care, tightening each screw as if it were a stitch in a wound too long left open. When she stood up, she dusted her hands on her apron and gave Sharon a nod that held something unspoken. Then she went back to the kitchen without another word. That Saturday, Sharon arrived with a plate of pancakes stacked high, the way Lena liked them, light on the syrup, butter tucked between the layers so it melted from the inside out. She added 2 strips of bacon, crisp but not too dark, and a glass of milk with just 1 ice cube, because Lena had said once, in the quietest of voices, that she liked it cold but not watered down. She placed the plate at the corner booth, just beneath the plaque, and stepped back. Lena wasn't in town that weekend. She was in a new school now, living with people who understood what she'd been through, who knew how to care for the daughter of a fallen soldier without turning her into a story. But still, the plate was there. Because some absences deserve to be honored, not erased. Because kindness, when rooted deep enough, doesn't need an audience. And because Sharon had learned, some promises don't end when the person is gone. They just take on new shapes, like a plaque, like a pancake, like a seat that's never empty, even when no one's sitting in it. The papers came on a Wednesday afternoon, delivered in an unmarked envelope with the courthouse seal pressed into the corner like a quiet nod. Sharon signed them with the hands that didn't tremble, just steady, certain, like she was anchoring something that had floated too long. Legal guardianship. A phrase that sounded clinical in courtrooms, but here, in the warm light of the diner's back office, it felt like a promise finally written in ink. Lena moved in the following week. No big announcement, no parade of boxes, just a single duffel bag, a few worn books, and a quiet look that said more than any words could manage. Sharon cleared out the spare room that same night, brushing dust from the dresser drawers, laying a quilt over the bed that had belonged to her mother. She didn't decorate, just left space, for Lena to fill in her own time. School started on a Monday. Sharon packed lunch in a brown paper bag with a name scrawled across the front, Lena G. She wasn't sure if the girl would like it, but when Lena returned that afternoon, she slipped the bag into Sharon's hand, now neatly folded, and said, almost too softly to hear, "I kept it. It made me feel like I had someone." The days found rhythm. Not perfect, but steady. Lena didn't talk much, but she spoke more now. Simple sentences, observations, questions with weight behind them. Do birds get cold? Did you ever shoot a rifle? Do you think she would have liked pancakes? Sharon answered what she could, left space where she couldn't. They moved through mornings like choreography, breakfast, school, diner. Nights were quieter. Sometimes they watched old black and white movies on the couch. Sometimes they sat in silence, each with their own notebook, Sharon writing, Lena drawing. Sharon had started journaling again. Nothing fancy, just reflections, fragments, half-finished sentences. She wrote about Grace, about Lena, about the way grief carves space that love somehow fills. She didn't try to make it beautiful. She just told the truth. One evening, as she closed the last receipt book of the night, Sharon found a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the final check. On it, drawn in colored pencil, was a picture of the diner, the corner booth, the pancakes, a cup of cocoa with steam curling into a heart, and behind the counter, a woman in an apron with her arms open wide. Beneath it, in careful block letters, was written, "Home." Sharon held the drawing for a long time. Then she slipped it into her journal and turned off the lights. It was a quiet morning, the kind that crept in gently through the blinds and settled across the countertops like an old friend. The diner smelled of cinnamon and brewing coffee, and the sky outside was the soft blue of early spring, washed clean and full of light. Sharon moved through the routine the way she always did, her body knowing the steps even before her mind caught up. Unlock the door. Turn the sign. Heat the griddle. Pour the first cup. It was a rhythm she'd kept for years now, a dance of habit and heart. She reached for her usual mug, the chipped one with the faint blue ring and a handle worn smooth from time. But underneath it, folded with precision and slipped just barely into view, was a piece of paper. Small, soft at the corners, carefully hidden like a secret meant to be found. She unfolded it slowly, her thumb brushing the crease. The handwriting was steady, simple. You didn't save me with food. You saved me because you never made me explain my hunger. Sharon's hand paused halfway to her chest. The words sat there, quietly monumental, not demanding anything, just offering truth. A kind of truth that didn't need elaboration. It was the kind of sentence that reached into you and settled, like something that had been waiting for its moment to speak. Beneath it, in the unmistakable loops and careful strokes of Lena's handwriting, love, your girl, always. Sharon read it once, then again, then a third time, letting the silence stretch around her like a warm coat. The bell above the door hadn't rung yet. The world hadn't stepped in to ask for coffee or eggs or the morning paper. It was just her, the sunlight, and this note. She thought about that first morning, gray with fog and silence, and how much had changed since then, and how much hadn't. Lena still curled her sleeves over her hands when she was nervous. She still loved her cocoa just barely hot, and she still didn't say everything out loud. She didn't have to. Sharon folded the note and slipped it into her apron pocket. She didn't need to frame it or pin it or tell anyone. She just needed to carry it. Because some words weren't for the world. Some words were meant to be held close. Proof that someone had been seen, and more than that, understood.